There are moments in life when silence speaks louder than any words ever could. When a judge asks a simple question in a divorce courtroom, the answer should be straightforward. But when a mother calmly states she wants everything from the marriage, the house, the savings, the car, and then adds one more thing with chilling composure, the room freezes. She doesn't want the child. Her own lawyer asks her to repeat it, perhaps hoping he misheard. She repeats it without hesitation. That child was me. Years later, I stand in a hospital corridor holding a box of letters I wrote but never sent, facing a woman I don't recognize. My father's hand trembles on my shoulder as a doctor asks a question that will shatter everything I thought I knew about my past. The woman in the wheelchair down the hall is struggling to speak, struggling to be understood, living in a silence she once chose to impose on someone else. And somehow, impossibly, our two worlds are about to collide in ways neither of us could have imagined. This is a story about the words we never say, the choices we can't undo, and the moment when seeing and being seen becomes more powerful than any apology. Subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and comment below where you're watching from. You won't want to miss what happens next. The fluorescent lights in the hospital hallway hummed with a frequency I couldn't hear, but somehow felt in my chest. That's the thing about silence. It's never really silent. There's always something vibrating beneath the surface, waiting to break through. I stood there holding an envelope that had turned yellow with time, the kind of yellow that speaks of years spent in darkness, tucked away in places we pretend don't exist. My father was beside me, but his attention was elsewhere, fixed on something or someone down the corridor near the nurse's station. I followed his gaze and saw her. A woman in her late 50s, maybe 60, sitting in a wheelchair with her back partially to us. There was something in the way my father looked at her that made my stomach tighten. Not recognition exactly, but something deeper, something older. The hospital sounds continued around us. The pneumatic whoosh of automatic doors, the squeak of rubber soles on linoleum, the muffled conversations of people delivering news both good and terrible. I read it all in vibrations, in the movement of air, in the subtle changes in people's faces as they passed. None of it reached me the way it reached them, but I'd learned long ago that hearing and understanding aren't the same thing. My father's hand touched my shoulder and I turned to face him so I could read his lips. But he wasn't ready to speak yet. His jaw worked silently, the way it did when he was choosing words carefully, editing sentences in his mind before releasing them into the world. Then the scene shifted. Not in the hallway, but in my mind, or maybe in his, bleeding into mine through the expression on his face. I saw it clearly, the way you see things in dreams that feel more real than memory. A courtroom. The kind with wood paneling that's supposed to convey authority, but mostly just absorbs sound and makes everything feel muffled and distant. My father sitting at a table, younger, but already carrying the weight that would become permanent in his shoulders. Across from him, that same woman, decades younger, her lawyer beside her in a suit that cost more than our monthly rent. The judge, a tired man whose voice I've never heard but could somehow imagine, asked a question that should have been simple. The lawyer listed items, the house they'd bought together, the savings account, the car, the furniture, the wedding gifts that had somehow survived 5 years of marriage. She wanted all of it. Fair enough, maybe. Divorce is division, after all. Then she said something else. I couldn't hear it in this vision, this memory that wasn't mine, but I saw the reaction. The court reporter's fingers paused on the stenograph. The judge leaned forward. My father's lawyer, a public defender doing this as a favor, set down his pen with deliberate slowness. The judge must have asked her to repeat it. Lawyers love repetition. It creates record, makes things official, turns moments into documents. She repeated it. Her mouth formed the words with the kind of calm that comes from decision, from having already made peace with something terrible. She didn't want the child. She didn't want me. The lawyer, her own lawyer, asked her to reconsider. Not because it was wrong, but because it looked wrong. Because courts don't like mothers who don't want their children, even when fathers who don't want their children barely raise an eyebrow. She shook her head. Calm, certain, final. Back in the present. I felt my father's hand squeeze my shoulder once. A signal. A doctor was approaching, clipboard in hand, the universal symbol of someone about to ask questions that have already been answered in forms filled out in triplicate. "Which of you is the legal guardian?" the doctor asked. My father's lips moved. "I am." The doctor glanced at me, then at my father, then down the hallway toward the woman in the wheelchair. There was something in his expression. Confusion, maybe, or the careful neutrality medical professionals wear when they're about to deliver information they don't fully understand. "Does he know who she is?" the doctor asked, nodding toward me. My father turned to face me fully, and I saw something in his eyes I'd rarely seen before. Fear, maybe, or shame, or that particular kind of pain that comes from protecting someone from the truth for so long that the truth becomes a stranger, something dangerous and unknown. I looked at the woman in the wheelchair again, really looked this time. Tried to find something familiar in the curve of her shoulders, the angle of her neck, the way her hands rested in her lap. Nothing. I turned back to my father and shook my head. No, I didn't know who she was. But even as I made that gesture, even as I confirmed my ignorance, I felt the weight of the envelope in my hand, saw the way my father's eyes dropped to it, and then away, and I understood with sudden, terrible clarity that I was about to learn something that couldn't be unlearned. The doctor waited, pen hovering over his clipboard, for someone to explain the inexplicable. The apartment we moved into after the divorce was on the 3rd floor of a building that smelled like old carpet and someone else's cooking. It had 2 bedrooms, which felt like luxury after the uncertainty of those first few weeks. But the walls were thin enough that I could feel conversations happening in adjacent units, the vibration of raised voices, the thump of footsteps, the slam of doors that punctuated arguments I would never fully understand. I was 7 years old, and I had developed a routine of waiting. Every afternoon I would position myself by the living room window, the one that overlooked the parking lot, and I would watch. I watched for a car I remembered, blue, with a scratch on the passenger door that looked like a lightning bolt. I watched for a shape I knew, a silhouette that matched the one stored in the imperfect filing system of childhood memory. My father never told me to stop watching. He would come home from work, his first shift at the factory, the one he took because it paid enough to cover rent and groceries and the therapy appointments we drove 2 hours to attend, and he would find me there, pressed against the glass, and he would simply set his lunchbox down and start making dinner. The phone sat on a small table in the hallway, black and heavy, the kind with a rotary dial that required patience to use. I couldn't hear it ring, but I had learned to recognize the flash of the red light my father had installed, a modification that cost him 2 days' wages, but that he never mentioned as a sacrifice. Whenever that light flashed, my whole body would tense. I would turn toward it, waiting to see my father's face, trying to read in his expression whether this call was the one. It never was. I tried calling for her in those early days. My voice was something I used without truly understanding it, a tool I deployed based on memory rather than feedback. I knew I had called her Mom before, though I couldn't remember the sound of the word, couldn't recall if I had said it correctly or if it had come out shaped wrong, distorted by the silence that surrounded it. I would stand in the middle of the living room and call out, forming the word with my mouth the way I remembered, pushing air through my throat in what I hoped was the right pattern. My father never corrected me, never told me I was too loud or too quiet, or that the word was coming out broken. He would just watch with eyes that held something I was too young to name, a grief so profound it had no language, only presence. After several weeks, I developed a new routine. I would take my schoolwork to the window, spreading papers across the sill, and I would glance up between math problems and spelling words, checking the parking lot for changes. A blue car would appear sometimes, but it was never the right blue, never the right scratch, never her. Now, standing in this hospital corridor decades later, I watch my father's face as the doctor waits for an explanation. I can see him struggling with something, the same struggle I remember from those early days, the weight of truth versus the mercy of omission. He turns to me, and his hands move, signing slowly, carefully, the way he always did when the words mattered most. She needs help. That's all you need to know right now. But I'm not 7 anymore. I don't accept simple answers. I sign back. Who is she? My father's hands hesitate, hovering in the space between us like birds uncertain of where to land. The doctor shifts his weight, checking his watch, clearly uncomfortable with this silent exchange he cannot fully understand. Before my father can respond, I remember something I haven't thought about in years. A specific day, ordinary in every way except for what didn't happen. I was 9 years old, maybe 10. I had come home from school and walked past the window without stopping. I had eaten the snack my father left out, started my homework at the kitchen table, finished it, and gone to bed. I hadn't watched for her car, hadn't thought about the phone, hadn't called out into the empty apartment hoping my voice would somehow summon her back into existence. My father had noticed. I saw it in the way he paused while washing dishes that evening, hands still in the soapy water, staring at nothing. He had been waiting for this day, I realized later. The day I would stop expecting her return. The day the wound would begin to scar over, even if it never fully healed. He had never asked me why I stopped, never acknowledged the shift. We had simply moved forward, the two of us, building a life in the space her absence had created. But now she's here. Somehow, impossibly, she's here. And the question I stopped asking all those years ago suddenly has an answer waiting, just down the corridor, sitting in a wheelchair, unable to speak clearly, unable to explain why she left, or why she's returned, or what she expects to find in this fluorescent lit hallway where past and present have collided. My father's hands finally move again. She stays here tonight. Tomorrow, we talk. I look at him, really look at him, and I see the same expression he wore all those years ago when I stopped watching the window. Relief, mixed with sorrow. Gratitude, mixed with guilt. The complex mathematics of a parent who has tried to do right by their child while knowing that some wounds can't be prevented, only witnessed. The doctor clears his throat, pulling us back to the present moment, to the practical questions of insurance and treatment plans and visiting hours. My father turns to answer him, and I turn back toward the woman in the wheelchair. She's looking in our direction now. Even from this distance, I can see her trying to understand who we are, why we're here, what connection we have to her fragmented present. I realize I'm still holding the yellow envelope. I don't remember picking it up again, but there it is, pressed between my palm and my chest, right over my heart. I learned to write before I fully understood what writing meant. My father had insisted on it, spending evenings at our small kitchen table guiding my hand across lined paper, teaching me that words could exist outside of mouths and ears. That language had a permanent sound could never achieve. By the time I was 8, I could write simple sentences. By 9, I could express thoughts that felt too complicated for the limited sign language vocabulary we'd built together. And by 10, I had discovered something my father never intended, that I could write to someone who wasn't there. The first letter was an accident. I had been practicing my handwriting, copying sentences from a book about a boy and his dog, when suddenly I was writing something else entirely. "Dear Mom," it began. And then the words just came, tumbling out in handwriting that slanted and curved with the uncertainty of youth. I told her about school, about my teacher, Mrs. Patterson, who wore bright scarves and smiled at me even when I answered questions incorrectly, about the other kids who had stopped staring at my hearing aids after the first few weeks, about my father, who packed my lunch every morning and who always remembered to cut my sandwiches diagonally because I had once mentioned, in passing signs, that triangles tasted better than rectangles. I didn't mail it. The thought never even occurred to me. I folded it carefully and tucked it into my desk drawer, beneath the pencils and erasers and the collection of smooth stones I'd gathered from the playground. The second letter came a week later, then another, and another. They became a ritual, something I did on Sunday afternoons while my father watched football games he couldn't really afford to care about. His attention divided between the television and the paperwork that seemed to multiply on our coffee table. Bills, insurance forms, notices from the school. I wrote about everything and nothing, about the stray cat that lived behind our building, and that I'd named Whisper because it seemed fitting. About the substitute teacher who spoke too fast for me to read her lips and how frustrated I'd felt, how invisible. About the day I'd scored well on a math test and had wanted to tell someone, anyone, and had settled for telling the empty page. My father found the letters by accident on a Saturday morning when he was searching my room for a library book that was overdue. I was in the living room working on a puzzle when I felt the change in air pressure that meant he'd entered the room behind me. I turned and saw him holding the shoebox I'd transferred the letters to. There were too many for the desk drawer by then. His face carried an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not disappointment. Something closer to pain, but softer, more complicated. He sat down beside me on the floor, setting the box between us, and signed, "How long?" I signed back, 2 years. He opened the box, carefully, as if the letters might disintegrate under rough handling. There were dozens of them, maybe more. Some were single pages, others multiple sheets stapled together. The paper had yellowed slightly at the edges, and my handwriting evolved visibly across the chronology, from the shaky block letters of a child to something more fluid, more certain. "Why didn't you send them?" he asked, his hands moving slowly, giving me time to process each word. I thought about this for a long moment. I was 12 by then, old enough to understand some things, but still too young to articulate others. Finally, I signed. What if she doesn't want to read them? Something shifted in my father's face. He pulled me close, and I felt his chest expand and contract in a pattern I recognized as crying, though I couldn't hear the sound. We sat like that for a while, surrounded by my unsent correspondence, my one-sided conversation with someone who had chosen not to listen. He never told me to stop writing the letters. He also never encouraged me to send them. The box returned to my closet, and the ritual continued, though less frequently as I grew older and life filled with other things. High school, friends, the particular challenges of navigating a world built for people who hear. Now, standing in my father's living room decades later, I watch him search through the storage closet, moving boxes and old photo albums, looking for something specific. The doctor had sent us home with instructions and paperwork, told us to return in the morning when the patient would be more stable, more ready for visitors. My father pulls out a box I recognize immediately, even after all these years. The same shoebox, now held together with tape, the cardboard soft with age and handling. He sets it on the coffee table between us and signs, "I need to tell you something." But I'm already opening the box, already seeing what I haven't seen in years. The letters are all there, exactly as I left them, but there's something else now, something I don't remember. The envelopes aren't all blank anymore. Some of them have addresses written in my father's careful handwriting. Some have stamps. Some have postmarks. I look up at him, confusion mixing with something else, something I can't quite name. He signs slowly. I sent them, not all of them, just some, over the years. My hands won't move. I want to ask why, want to ask when, want to ask if she ever responded, but my body has frozen in this moment of revelation. My father continues signing. "She needed to know you were okay. Even if she couldn't face you, she needed to know." I pick up the letters one by one, examining the postmarks. They span years. The most recent is dated just 3 months ago. The handwriting is mine, but older. I must have been in my 20s when I wrote it. I don't remember writing it. I don't remember what it says. I look at my father, and he signs one more thing, the movement of his hands heavy with years of secret keeping. She kept every one. She had moved to a different city 3 months after the divorce was finalized. A place 2 states away where nobody knew her story, where she could introduce herself without the weight of explanation, without the questions that came from people who had known her before. The apartment she rented was small but clean, on the second floor of a converted house with hardwood floors that creaked in the morning and walls painted a neutral beige that the landlord called warm sand. She furnished it slowly, carefully, buying only what she needed: a bed, a small table, 2 chairs, a reading lamp that cast soft light in the evenings. She found work at a dental office, filing insurance claims and scheduling appointments, answering phones with a voice that people described as pleasant and professional. Her coworkers were kind without being intrusive, inviting her to lunch occasionally but accepting when she declined, respecting the invisible boundaries she established without ever explicitly drawing them. On weekends, she would walk through the farmer's market downtown, buying fresh vegetables and bread from vendors who greeted her by name after a few months. She joined a book club at the local library, sitting in a circle of women who discussed novels and shared coffee, and never asked too many personal questions. She volunteered at an animal shelter on Tuesday evenings, finding comfort in the uncomplicated needs of dogs and cats who wanted only food and affection and consistency. To anyone watching, she was living a perfectly acceptable life, a quiet life, a life that appeared whole and self-contained, lacking nothing essential. She never mentioned having a child. When new acquaintances asked the standard getting-to-know-you questions, she would redirect, deflect, or simply smile and change the subject. It wasn't exactly lying. It was more like editing, cutting out chapters that didn't fit the narrative she was constructing. At the book club, when they read a novel about motherhood and the other women shared stories of their own children, grown now, most of them, scattered across the country with careers and families of their own, she listened with appropriate interest and contributed nothing. When a coworker brought her daughter to the office one afternoon and everyone cooed over the little girl's pigtails and missing front teeth, she complimented the child's dress and returned to her filing. There was no malice in the omission, no active cruelty, just a steady, persistent denial, a refusal to acknowledge a reality that felt too complicated, too painful, too revealing of choices she had made that couldn't be unmade. Now, lying in a hospital bed with bandages wrapped around her head and machines monitoring her vital signs, she tries to piece together how she got here. The doctor has explained that she was in an accident, that a car ran a red light and struck her vehicle on the driver's side, that she's lucky to be alive. The impact caused trauma to her jaw and throat, damage that will heal but that currently makes speaking difficult, makes forming words a laborious process that exhausts her. The irony isn't lost on her, though she lacks the energy to fully appreciate it. She spent years choosing silence, choosing not to speak about certain things, certain people. Now silence has been chosen for her. A nurse comes in to check her vitals, moving efficiently through the routine, adjusting the IV drip, making notes on a chart. The nurse's lips move, forming words that should be simple, questions about pain levels, comfort, needs. But the words come out muffled and unclear, harder to decipher than they should be. She tries to respond, tries to say that yes, she's in pain, that no, she doesn't need anything right now, but her mouth won't cooperate. The words stick somewhere between thought and speech, coming out garbled and incomplete. The nurse is patient, practiced in dealing with patients who struggle to communicate. She brings a small whiteboard and marker, suggests writing instead. Her hand shakes as she grips the marker, producing letters that look like a child's, unsteady and uneven. Pain, she writes. Tired. The nurse nods, understanding, and adjusts something on one of the machines. The morphine drip, probably. Relief comes slowly, warmly, spreading through her body like honey through tea. In the fog of medication, she thinks about the man and the younger man she saw in the hallway earlier. Something about them had felt familiar, though she couldn't place why. The older one had looked at her with an expression she recognized but couldn't name, something between recognition and reluctance, like seeing a stranger who reminds you of someone you used to know. The younger one had been watching her too, but differently. His gaze held curiosity without context, observation without judgment. He had been holding something, an envelope or folder, clutched close to his chest as if protecting it. Through the partially open door, she sees movement in the hallway. Someone signing, hands moving in patterns she doesn't understand but that communicate with a fluency she envies in her current state. The younger man from before, she realizes, talking to a nurse who responds in kind, their conversation flowing soundlessly, efficiently, with none of the struggle she's experiencing. The nurse in her room notices her watching and says something, lips forming words carefully. She catches parts of it, Volunteer interpreter, helps us. Patients who... She wants to ask questions but lacks the energy and the means. Instead, she watches through the doorway as the young man continues his silent conversation, his hands painting meaning in the air, and she feels something shift inside her chest. Not quite recognition, but something close to it. An awareness of absence, of something missing that she can't quite identify. The morphine pulls her under before she can pursue the thought further, dragging her down into sleep where dreams and memories tangle together into narratives that make sense only in that twilight space between consciousness and unconsciousness. When she wakes again, the hallway is quiet. The young man is gone. But the feeling remains, that sense of something unfinished, something waiting to be acknowledged, hovering just beyond the edges of her carefully constructed forgetting. My father had always been the bridge between me and a world designed without consideration for people like me. From the moment my hearing loss was diagnosed, progressive, the doctors had said, using that word as if it softened the reality of what was happening, he had appointed himself as my interpreter, not just of sound but of intention, context, and the complicated social choreography that hearing people performed without thinking. He learned sign language before I was old enough to spell my own name, attending evening classes at the community center while neighbors watched me for free, trading babysitting hours for the casseroles he would make on weekends. By the time I was 5, we had developed our own hybrid system, official ASL mixed with gestures we'd invented ourselves, a private language built from necessity and love. The elementary school hadn't wanted to accept me at first. The principal, a thin woman with glasses that sat crooked on her nose, had explained with practiced sympathy that they lacked the resources, the trained staff, the proper accommodations. My father had sat across from her desk, calm and immovable, and explained that federal law disagreed with her assessment. He came to that meeting prepared with documentation, legal precedents, contact information for advocacy organizations. She had reluctantly signed the enrollment forms. But laws only go so far. They can mandate access but not acceptance, accommodation but not understanding. My father became a fixture at the school, attending meetings with teachers who spoke too quickly or faced the blackboard while giving instructions, patiently explaining that I needed to see their faces, needed them to slow down, needed the consideration that cost nothing but awareness. He translated the subtle rejections that came from other parents, the birthday party invitations that never arrived, the playdates that were always, not a good time right now, the careful distance maintained by people who didn't want to deal with difference. He never told me directly about these things, but I learned to read them in the tightness around his eyes when he picked me up from school, in the way he would suggest alternative activities. Just the two of us, always better anyway. When I was 12, a teacher accused me of cheating on a test because my answers were too good for someone with my disability. The word hung there in the meeting, disability, used like an explanation for expected limitation. My father had responded with a control that must have cost him everything, producing my study materials, my practice tests, the hours of work we'd put in together at our kitchen table. The teacher had apologized, but the damage was done. I learned that day that some people would always see my hearing loss before they saw me. The medical appointments were their own kind of battlefield. Audiologists who spoke to my father instead of to me, even when I was old enough to answer questions myself. Specialists who recommended procedures and treatments without bothering to explain them in ways I could understand. Insurance representatives who classified my hearing aids as optional equipment rather than essential tools. My father fought every battle, translated every conversation, ensured that I was included in discussions about my own body, my own life. Now, standing at the nurse's station in this hospital, I watch my father explain our situation to the floor supervisor. His hands move as he speaks, an unconscious habit he's developed over the years, signing and speaking simultaneously, even when talking to people who don't understand signs. A nurse approaches me, her face showing the particular expression people wear when they're about to ask for help but aren't sure how to phrase the request. She taps my shoulder gently, and when I turn, she points to a room down the hall, and then mimics writing on her palm. I understand immediately. She needs an interpreter. The hospital must have volunteer interpreters on call for situations like this, and she's mistaken me for one. It's an honest error. I'm young, clearly comfortable with sign language and wearing casual clothes rather than the visitor badges that identify patients' family members. I could correct her, should correct her, but my father is still deep in conversation with the supervisor, and something about the nurse's expression, hopeful, slightly desperate, makes me hesitate. I nod and follow her down the hallway. She leads me to a room where an elderly man sits in bed, his hands moving frantically, signing something I can barely follow because he's upset, the signs coming too fast and too imprecise. The nurse stands helplessly by, clipboard in hand, clearly needing information she can't access. I approach the bed slowly and sign to the man. "Slow down, I'm here to help." He looks at me and something in him settles. Someone who understands. Someone who speaks his language. He begins again, more carefully this time, explaining that he needs to contact his daughter, that no one has called her, that she'll be worried. I translate for the nurse, watching her face relax with understanding. We spend 20 minutes working through the details, phone numbers, medications, next of kin information. The man's signs become less frantic, more conversational. He thanks me, his hands forming the gesture with a precision that speaks of decades of use. As I'm about to leave, the nurse touches my arm and signs slowly, carefully. "Thank you. Can you help with another patient?" I should say no, should explain the misunderstanding, but I find myself nodding instead. She leads me to a different room, the woman from yesterday, the one my father had stared at in the hallway. She's awake now, sitting partially upright, her face showing the particular frustration of someone who has thoughts, but no easy way to express them. The nurse explains, speaking slowly so I can read her lips. She has aphasia from the accident. She understands everything, but speaking is difficult. We thought maybe signing would be easier. I step into the room, and the woman's eyes lock onto mine. There's something in her gaze that makes me uncomfortable, a searching quality, as if she's trying to place me in a context she can't quite access. I sign. "Hello, I'm here to help you communicate with the nurses." She watches my hands with an intensity that seems like more than just concentration. Then, with visible effort, she lifts her own hands and attempts a sign. It's clumsy, unpracticed, but recognizable. "Thank you." We work through basic questions, pain levels, comfort needs, dietary restrictions. Her attempts at signing improve slightly with practice, muscle memory from some distant past perhaps, or just quick learning born of necessity. Then she tries to form another sign, struggles with it, and finally manages to shape the question that changes everything. Her hands move slowly, deliberately, forming words I can read clearly. "He. Mine?" I don't understand the question. I sign back. "Who?" She points toward the hallway, toward where my father was standing earlier, and then points at me. Her hands move again, trying to form the question more clearly, but the effort costs her. Tears form in her eyes, frustration and something else mixing together. I leave her room without answering, my heart doing something irregular in my chest, a rhythm I can feel but not hear. My father is in the hallway, and the moment he sees my face, he knows. He's always been able to read me like that, to see past whatever expression I'm trying to maintain and into the confusion or hurt or anger underneath. He guides me to a small waiting area, empty except for plastic chairs bolted to the floor and a television playing news no one is watching. We sit, and for a long moment, neither of us moves. The silence between us is different now, heavy with things unsaid for too many years. Finally, his hands begin to move. "I need to tell you something I should have told you a long time ago." I want to stop him. Part of me wants to stand up and walk away, to preserve the version of my history I've built and accepted, the narrative where I was unwanted by someone abstract, someone who existed only as an absence. But I stay seated, my hands folded in my lap, waiting. "That woman," he signs, "is your mother." The words hang in the air between us, visible only in the memory of his hands forming them. I already knew, on some level. Had known since the moment she asked her question, since the way my father looked at her in the hallway. But knowing and being told are different things. One is suspicion, the other is fact. My hands move before I can stop them. Why is she here? She was in an accident 3 days ago. I'm listed as her emergency contact. I've always been listed. This detail lands with unexpected weight. All these years, through her new life in a new city, through whatever identity she'd constructed for herself, she had kept that connection. Not to me, but to him. A thread so thin it was nearly invisible, but never completely severed. Why didn't you tell me? I sign, and even in the formality of sign language, the hurt comes through. My father's response is slow, careful, each sign weighted with consideration. Because I didn't know how. Because every year that passed made it harder. Because I thought I was protecting you from more pain. I think about all the letters I wrote, all the words I poured onto pages that I thought would never be read. The private conversation I had with someone who existed only in my imagination. The mother I had constructed from absence and longing. You sent my letters, I sign. When? The first one when you were 13. You'd written about starting middle school, about being scared and excited at the same time. It felt wrong to keep it from her, so I sent it. He pauses, his hands dropping to his lap before rising again. She never responded, not directly, but 6 months later she sent a letter to me. Just one line. Thank you for letting me know he's okay. The revelation cracked something open inside me. She had known about school, about my life, about the person I was becoming, had chosen to know from a distance, to receive information without offering anything in return. Did she ever ask to see me? My hands form the question I'm not sure I want answered. My father's face does something complicated, a mixture of emotions I don't have names for. Once, you were 15. She called and said she wanted to meet you, wanted to explain. I told her no. This surprises me more than anything else. Why? Because you were finally stable, finally happy. You had friends, you were doing well in school, you'd stopped asking about her. I couldn't let her walk back into your life just because she was finally ready. It had to be about what you needed, not what she needed. I understand his logic, can even appreciate the protectiveness behind it. But it's complicated by anger, by the realization that choices were made about my life, about my relationships, without my knowledge or consent. What happened to her? I sign, meaning not the accident, but everything before it. Why she left, why she stayed away, why she kept that thread of connection while refusing to pull on it. My father's hands move more slowly now, tired from carrying this story for so long. She was scared of your hearing loss, of what it meant, of whether she could handle it. She convinced herself you'd be better off without her, that I was better equipped to raise you alone. And maybe I was. But that doesn't make what she did right. He continues. She built a whole new life. New friends, new routines, a new identity. But she never remarried, never had other children. She stayed connected to me just enough to know you were alive and okay, but not enough to actually be part of your life. The psychology of it is fascinating and terrible. A woman who couldn't fully leave but couldn't fully stay, who existed in a kind of permanent limbo between abandonment and connection. Does she want to see me now? I sign. I don't know. My father responds. We haven't talked about it. She's been in and out of consciousness dealing with pain and confusion, but yes, I think eventually she'll want to explain. To try to make sense of choices that probably don't make sense even to her. I think about the woman in the hospital bed struggling to form signs with unpracticed hands, tears in her eyes as she tried to ask if I was hers. The irony of the situation isn't lost on me. She spent years choosing not to communicate, and now communication has been forcibly taken from her. I look at my father, at the man who raised me alone, who learned an entirely new language for me, who fought every battle and translated every interaction and never once made me feel like a burden, and I make a decision that surprises us both. My hands move with certainty. I want to read the letters, all of them, To her, my father's eyes widen. "Are you sure?" "No," I sign. "But I need to do it anyway." She spent years knowing about me from a distance. Maybe it's time she heard from me directly, not through you, not through filtered information, through my own words. We returned to her room the next afternoon with the shoebox of letters. My father carries it like it contains something fragile and explosive, which in a way it does. Years of one-sided conversation, childhood longing transformed into words, the documentation of a relationship that existed only in my imagination and on paper. She's more alert today, propped up with pillows, her eyes tracking us as we enter. The nurse has explained who we are, I assume, because there's recognition in her face now, mixed with something that looks like fear or shame or both. My father sets the box on the rolling tray table and positions it where she can see. Her eyes drop to it, then back to us, a question forming on her face that her damaged voice can't articulate. I pull up a chair beside her bed. My father stands slightly behind me, close enough to translate but far enough to give us space. I reach into the box and pull out the first letter, the one I wrote when I was 8 years old. My handwriting large and uncertain, the letters sprawling across the page like they were still learning where they belonged. My hands begin to move, translating the words I wrote decades ago into signs. My father speaks them aloud simultaneously, his voice giving sound to my silence, creating a strange doubling effect. Past and present, child and adult, written and spoken all existing at once. "Dear Mom," the letter begins. "Today at school we learned about planets. Mrs. Patterson says Saturn has rings made of ice and rock. I think that's beautiful. Dad says maybe we can go to the planetarium next month to see pictures of them. I wish you could come too." The letter continues with the mundane details of an 8-year-old's life, a scraped knee from falling off a swing, a book about dinosaurs checked out from the library, the way our neighbor's cat lets me pet it sometimes. Nothing profound, nothing accusatory. Just the everyday observations of a child who wanted to share his world with someone who wasn't there. My mother watches my hands form each sign, tears streaming down her face silently. She doesn't try to wipe them away, just lets them fall. Her attention completely focused on the translation of words she received years ago, but perhaps never fully absorbed. I move to the second letter, written a few months later. This one mentions my hearing aids, the new ones that fit better and don't whistle when I turn my head too fast. I wrote about how proud I was to pick them out myself, choosing blue because it was my favorite color. "Dad says I'm brave," the letter says. But I don't feel brave. I just feel different. Sometimes the other kids stare, but Dad says being different isn't bad. It's just different. I hope he's right. Letter after letter, I translate my childhood into signs. Some are longer, some shorter. Some mention her directly, asking questions I know now were never answered. Others barely reference her at all, simply documenting the progress of a life that continued without her. One letter, written when I was 11, contains a passage that stops me momentarily. "I used to think you left because of me, because I couldn't hear, because I wasn't good enough. But Dad explained that sometimes people leave because of their own fears, not because of who we are." I'm trying to believe him. My hands pause after forming these signs. I look at my mother, and she's openly weeping now, her face contorted with emotion she can't voice. Her hand reaches out, trembling, and touches the edge of the letter I'm holding. The later letters shift in tone. The ones from my teenage years are more guarded, less openly emotional. They describe achievements, making the honor roll, getting accepted into college, landing my first job. Without the vulnerable longing of the early letters. It's documentation rather than conversation, information delivery rather than connection seeking. But then there's a letter from when I was 22, written during a particularly difficult period. I'd forgotten this one, forgotten the rawness it contained. My hands slow as I translate it. I met someone recently who asked about my family. I realized I didn't know how to answer. Do I have a mother? Technically, yes. Functionally, no. I settled for saying it's complicated, which is the truth, but not the whole truth. The whole truth is that I spent my childhood wanting you to want me, and my adulthood trying not to want anything from you at all. I'm not sure which is harder. The letter continues. Dad has been everything. Father, mother, advocate, friend. But sometimes I wonder what it would have been like to have you too. Not instead of him, but alongside him. I wonder if I would be different, better, more complete, or if I'm exactly who I was meant to be, shaped by your absence as much as his presence. I finish the letter and look up. My mother's hand has moved to her chest, pressing against her heart as if trying to contain something that wants to break free. She's making sounds now, attempts at words that emerge broken and incomplete. My father steps closer and translates what he can decipher from her attempts. I'm sorry, so sorry, but I'm not finished. There's one more letter, the most recent one, written just months ago. I pull it from the bottom of the box, surprised to find it there, surprised I wrote it at all. My hands form the sign slowly, giving each word weight. I've stopped being angry. Anger requires energy I don't want to spend on someone who chose not to be present. But I haven't stopped being curious. I wonder sometimes what you're like now, whether you think about me, whether you regret your choice or have made peace with it. I wonder if you kept the letters Dad sent, if you read them once or many times, if they made you feel anything at all. The final paragraph makes me pause before translating. Here's what I've learned. You can miss someone you never really knew. You can grieve a relationship that never existed. And you can be okay anyway. Dad made sure I was okay. He made sure I knew I was worth staying for, even if you couldn't see it. I wish you could have seen it. But your blindness doesn't change what's true. The room falls into silence when I finish. My mother is shaking now, her whole body trembling with emotion that has no outlet, no voice, no easy release. She reaches for the letters with both hands, pulling them close, pressing them against her chest. Then my father says something that changes the entire room's energy. She kept them all. Every letter I sent. The social worker found them in her apartment after the accident, brought them to the hospital with her belongings. I turn to look at him, confused. He reaches into his jacket pocket and pulls out another envelope, this one addressed in handwriting I don't recognize. She wrote back, he says quietly. Just once. After the last letter. She never sent it, but she wrote it. My father hands me the envelope with a gentleness that suggests he's been carrying it carefully, protecting it from damage or loss. The paper is cream-colored, slightly textured, the kind you buy when words matter enough to deserve something better than notebook paper. I open it slowly, aware that my mother is watching, that my father is watching, that this moment contains a weight that will shift something fundamental in all of us. The handwriting inside is neat, controlled, the penmanship of someone who learned cursive properly and never abandoned it. I begin to read aloud, my voice doing the work my hands usually do, translating her words into sound for my father to hear and for my mother to remember writing. Dear son, it starts, and already my throat tightens around the words. I don't know if I'll ever send this letter. I don't know if I have the right to send it, or if you'd even want to receive it. But I'm writing it anyway, because some things need to be said even if they're never heard. The letter continues, and I force myself to keep reading. Your father sent me your latest letter, the one where you said you've stopped being angry. I've read it 20 times, maybe more, trying to understand how you became someone so thoughtful, so measured, so capable of grace I never earned. The answer, of course, is obvious. You became that person because of who raised you, not because of who didn't. My mother makes a sound, half sob, half something else. I pause, but she gestures with her hand for me to continue. A small wave that means, go on, don't stop. I need to hear this. I want to tell you why I left, but the truth is I don't fully understand it myself. I was afraid. That's the simple answer. But fear is never simple, is it? I was afraid of your hearing loss, yes, but more than that, I was afraid of my own inadequacy. Afraid I wouldn't know how to help you, how to advocate for you, how to be what you needed. Your father was so certain, so calm, so ready to learn whatever needed learning, and I felt like I was drowning in uncertainty. The letter goes on, the handwriting occasionally wavering as if written through tears. I told myself you'd be better off without me. That one good parent was better than one good parent and one terrified, incompetent one. I convinced myself that leaving was an act of love, of sacrifice, of putting your needs first. But that was a lie. It was cowardice, dressed up as selflessness. I look up from the letter to my mother's face. She's nodding slightly, acknowledging the truth of her own words, owning them even now. Every letter your father sent, I read obsessively. I memorized details of your life, your favorite color, your teacher's name, the books you loved, the awards you won. I built a version of you in my mind, a son I knew through documentation, but never through presence. And every time I thought about reaching out, about trying to reconnect, I convinced myself it was too late. That I'd forfeited my right to know you, that inserting myself into your life would only cause more harm. The letter's tone shifts. Your last letter said I can't see your worth, but that's not true. I've always seen it. In every word your father shared, in every achievement, in every small moment of your life that reached me through his translations. What I couldn't see was my own worth. I couldn't imagine that you might want a mother who had failed so completely, who had chosen fear over love, absence over presence. My hands are shaking now as I read the final paragraph. I don't expect forgiveness, I'm not sure I even want it, because forgiveness implies I've done something forgivable. What I want is for you to know that my leaving was never about you. It was always about me, my weakness, my fear, my inability to be brave enough to stay. You deserved better. You still do. And I'm grateful that your father made sure you got it. The letter ends with a single line. I hope you're happy. That's all I've ever really wanted. I set the letter down on the bed beside my mother. For a long moment, none of us moves. The machines continue their quiet monitoring, tracking heartbeat and oxygen and all the mechanical measurements of life, oblivious to the emotional earthquake happening in this small room. Then my mother does something unexpected. She lifts her hands, shaking and uncertain, and attempts to form signs. They're clumsy, the movements of someone who has watched but never practiced, who understands in theory but not execution. But I understand what she's trying to say. I'm sorry. I could leave it there, could accept the apology and walk away, close this chapter and move forward with the life I've built. But something in me, the part that wrote all those letters, the part that never stopped wondering, won't let me. I take her hand and she startles slightly at the contact as if she didn't expect to be touched. Her skin is dry, warm, more fragile than I expected. I hold it gently and begin to teach her a sign. Not, I forgive you. Not, it's okay. Something else. I shape her fingers carefully, moving them into position, guiding her through the motion. Once, twice, 3 times until muscle memory starts to form. My father watches, understanding what I'm doing before she does. The sign I'm teaching her is simple. Here. Present tense. Current location. Existence in this moment. She practices it a few more times, her movements becoming more confident. Then I teach her another sign, equally simple. Me. Finally, I add one more, creating a 3-word sentence. See me. Not I'm sorry, not I love you, just see me. A request, an invitation. A bridge between all the years of seeing each other through letters and documentation and distance, and the possibility of seeing each other directly, as we actually are. She forms the complete phrase slowly. See me. And then I respond with the same signs, mirroring her gesture. I see you. It's not forgiveness, it's not reconciliation. It's not even the beginning of a traditional mother-son relationship. But it's acknowledgement. It's presence. It's 2 people who share DNA and history and regret, choosing to occupy the same moment without pretending the past didn't happen. My father stands quietly in the corner, tears streaming down his face, watching the 2 people he's been translating for decades finally communicate directly with each other. We stay like that for a while, my mother's hand in mine, our eyes meeting across all the years of absence, the machines humming their mechanical lullaby. Outside the window, the sun begins to set, painting the hospital room in shades of gold and amber. Eventually, my mother's eyes grow heavy, exhaustion claiming her. But before she falls asleep, she forms one more sign, the one I taught her, shaky but deliberate. See me. And I sign back a promise and a truth. I see you. Some wounds are carried in silence, passed down through years of absence and longing, until the moment arrives when we must choose between holding on to justified pain or reaching across the divide toward something uncertain. This story asks us to consider the weight of choices made in fear, the cost of words left unspoken, and the courage it takes to simply be present when everything inside us wants to run. What would you have done in that hospital room? Would you have walked away from someone who walked away from you first? Or would you have found the strength to teach them a single sign, to bridge decades of silence with 3 simple words? The truth is, we all carry letters we've never sent, words meant for people who hurt us, left us, or failed to see our worth. We all face moments when forgiveness feels impossible and presence feels like too much to offer. But perhaps the deepest act of courage isn't forgiving the unforgivable. Perhaps it's choosing to see and be seen, to acknowledge the broken pieces of our shared humanity, and to understand that healing doesn't always look like reconciliation. Sometimes it looks like 2 trembling hands forming a sign that means here now in this moment. I see you. If this story touched something in you, subscribe to our channel to hear more stories that explore the complexity of human connection. Leave a like if you believe in second chances and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below and tell us, what would you have done? Your story matters too.